Hello and welcome to Marketing Speak. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and it is my pleasure to have Janet Driscoll Miller with us. Janet is the co-author of Data First Marketing, How to Compete and Win in the Age of Analytics, published by Wiley. She is the president and CEO of Marketing Mojo, an award-winning digital marketing agency and a frequent speaker on digital marketing and analytics. Janet, it's so great to have you on the show.
It's so great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So I would love, first of all, for us, the listeners and viewers to understand a bit more about what data first marketing means, since that's the title of your book.
You and I have known each other for a long time, and I've been working in agency life for many, many, many years in digital marketing. And I've worked with many different clients. And this book arose out of my experience in working with everyone from micro businesses all the way up to large global enterprise corporations and the problems that we saw in digital marketing. And the book really encapsulates the approach that I have been using with my clients for many, many years and focusing on being more than just data driven. We all like to say that we're data driven, and that's a very popular term. But the reality is that data needs to be at the center of everything that you're doing with marketing. And that's at every step of a marketing process, of a campaign process. And unfortunately, what I've witnessed over all these years has been that there's lots of challenges that sometimes folks aren't always aware of, marketers aren't always aware of, that is causing their data to not be accurate in many ways. And so when they say that they're data driven, they look at the data at the end of a campaign. They don't necessarily look at the data throughout the different parts of the campaign. Like, for instance, what data are you using to create personas? How effective are those personas? Are you measuring them? Or a piece of content? Like a lot of times I talk to content marketers and they'll say, yeah, we created these great pieces of content. I'm like, well, what's the point of them? Like, how are you measuring whether they were successful or not successful? And in many cases, they don't have a measurement. So there's a lot of holes that exist. And so our job as digital marketers and what data first marketing is about is taking data at every step of this process and analyzing how we can make each step of the process better and more effective to reach our end goals, which is typically, of course, revenue generation. And it's also about making sure that the marketing department has a voice and a seat at the table when it comes to the decisions that a company makes about its future and its budgeting and so forth. And unfortunately, I think marketing is often thought of as sort of the throwaway. People don't, CEOs and so forth don't always have confidence, unfortunately, in the marketing department and their ability to track what they're doing to meet those business goals, which is typically going to be revenue and sales, lead generation, that type of thing as well. And there's not a lot of confidence there from a C-suite. So this book is hopefully going to help marketers everywhere to connect with that C-suite, meet those business goals, and really learn how to track everything appropriately so they know if they're really meeting that revenue goal, that ROI, those business goals, as opposed to just saying, we're data-driven marketers, aren't we great? How are we really going to put that into action?
Right. And so let's talk a bit about business goals and how those can connect the marketing department with the entire organization and help align everybody's interests. Like, what would be an effective goal and what would be an ineffective goal? Maybe an example or two would be great.
Sure. So I think a lot, what we see currently in the C-suite, we've been seeing this even pre-COVID, was that CMOs had the smallest or shortest tenure of any C-suite executive. And so we're seeing a lot of turnover with CMOs. There's also been a shift where you see a lot of companies now talking about strategy officers or chief lead generation, that sort of thing. They're becoming more, you're seeing more of these titles that are really a bit more defined, more than just marketing. They actually are saying chief revenue officers and that sort of thing. And so it really speaks to the fact that companies are looking for leadership in marketing that is focused on revenue. And unfortunately, I think that marketers have gotten a bad rap for many years that we just don't care about that. When we really do, we truly do care about revenue generation. That's our job. But I think there's been a real disconnect between what marketers often will measure versus what the company cares about. And that's in part what I think has given us sort of a bad reputation with the C-suite in many cases. Like the CFO does not care how many likes we got on Instagram. They don't care. That's not important to them. What they care about is how much we spent on Instagram, maybe, but how does that effort directly impact a business goal of reaching a certain revenue number, or meet a goal, even just of like right now, a big goal for many companies is recruitment, like finding talent. How are we impacting that directly with the work that we're doing? And it's critical for marketers to bring those numbers to the table, because the other people we're talking with in the C-suite, like a CFO, like a chief sales officer, like a CEO, all that they care about is the numbers. They care about that data. And so if we come to them with something that isn't relevant data, like we got 1,000 likes on Instagram, that's great, but how did that impact us hiring new people? How did that impact us gaining the revenue goal we wanted for this year? And if we're not speaking that language as marketers, we're not going to be respected, and our input is not going to be taken into account when we want to help influence how the company moves forward with marketing and sales.
And so what would this look like in terms of distilling the information, the metrics, the KPIs down to something very visual, very easily understood and consumed by the upper management, C-suite executives? So I'm guessing maybe they're dashboards or reports, graphs, charts, something that you distill it down to so that you can see, oh, this is red, that's not good. This is green, that's great. Keep up the good work.
Yeah. You bring up a really good point. Data visualization is so key with this group. And really, anytime you want to tell a story, data visualization is critical, because you can have the best performance in the world. You could be driving tons of revenue, but if you put it in a bunch of tables that are not easy to read, and it's a lot of data, it's going to get skimmed over and probably ignored. And there's some really good studies. There's one I talk about in the book about data visualization, about how you present the data in general is really, really key. So your point about dashboarding and so forth is really important. Thinking about what is the best way to share this data. And in the book, we have some suggestions as an example of, like, if you're dealing with this kind of data, consider this type of visualization. Like this, just a guide for maybe where to get started. But I will say, before we even get to down the road to data visualization, it's having common understood goals. This is really important too when we're talking with the sales team, because a lot of definition of goals throughout the organization of what it really means. As an example, with sales in particular, when you work with sales as a marketer, especially like in B2B, and you're doing lead generation, how sales perceives a quality lead versus how marketing perceives a quality lead are often two different things. Marketing thinks, I brought in this lead, it came from my Google ad, it's great. But sales, on the other hand, and I'm sure every marketer can relate to this, some salesperson says, well, this is a Gmail address. This is no good. It's not that it's no good, right, necessarily. And how do they know it's no good? So sometimes those definitions are not in sync. That's a very common problem between marketing and sales in particular. But defining those goals as an organization, not just in marketing, but with the whole organization, and having a common definition for what that goal is. So what is a sales qualified lead? What makes a lead qualified? And then once you know that I'm measuring sales qualified leads, and this is how a sales qualified lead is measured, how I know that it's a qualified lead, then you can start to put those goals into a visualization, a dashboard, or a report, a regular report. and figure out the best way to show the progress in meeting that goal. But it definitely comes back to that definition first and making sure everyone has that common definition and wants to measure the same goals. That's, I would say, the first step.
Yeah, that's great. And can we hear what your ideal definition is of a sales qualified lead and how that differs from a marketing qualified lead?
Sure. And I think that really differs for every company because, different companies define who their personas are, who their best prospects are, who their best customers are likely to be. And so it's really custom to everyone. The way I would approach it, so I don't have like one set approach, but I would say the way I would recommend approaching it is look at your current customers, number one. You've got a database of your current customers. What do they look like? And it's understanding that really, really well so that you know how to go out and get more people just like that. So that sets you up when you think about like the personas themselves. Who are these people? Who are these audiences that are currently my customers? Then you can start to judge as you bring leads in. Do they match these criteria that most of my customers match? That could be demographic data. That could be, a platform that they come from where people normally hang out. Like as an example, you might say, typically, if someone comes from LinkedIn for a B2B, maybe that's a better qualified lead in general than coming from a platform like TikTok. It depends on what your makeup is and what your personas are. But sort of scoring that person based on those criteria helps you really define how qualified of a lead it is. But again, those definitions are something that marketing should not take on by themselves. Marketing can say, yeah, I've got a qualified lead. They came in, they filled out a form, they meet some basic criteria we have for marketing. But sales often has a different criteria, and that is based more on the leads that they see become opportunities and become sales and become the highest average order value customers and lifetime value customers. And so that's really data you as a marketer need to be able to get at so you can evaluate that and really build out the personas and understand who that target audience truly, truly is based on actual sales data.
Gotcha. Now, a scoring system that's designed by both marketing and sales departments to apply to leads that are coming in. What does that look like? What are some of the scoring criteria that you would recommend at least considering, if not incorporating?
I think, especially in B2B, when we're talking about lead generation that goes to a sales team to follow up, certainly demographic data. I find that typically things like job titles, job experience level, size of company, that's a huge one. I mean, that really applies to both B2C and B2B. If you have a company or a person, an individual, a consumer that can't afford your product, then that's a problem. Like you're targeting the wrong audience. So things like, for consumer side, income levels and where they live and, those types of demographics are really critical. And then on the B2B side, from a lead generation perspective, again, like job title, size of the company. Is it a one-person company? Is it a global enterprise company? Those things tend to be real standards when we talk about targeting specific audiences because it's funny. I talk to lots of different companies and sometimes I'll say to them, well, who's your target audience? And they'll say, everybody. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's not everybody. Let's get real here. Who is the real audience you're looking to work with? And you may have multiple audiences and some are higher priority than others because you may see that certain audiences have a higher lifetime value. You definitely are willing to spend more towards that audience. You're definitely willing to do whatever it takes to get that audience in. Whereas you may have another audience that, yeah, they're customers and you get some of them and they work out, it's fine, but they maybe have high turnover or whatever. Then you might say, yeah, I'm still targeting that audience, but their priority in my list of people that I'm targeting is going to be lower. And I might spend less budget there because they're not as important to me as these high lifetime value customers. And so definitely looking at all that data and understanding it is really key to making sure you put your money in the right place, your investments are in the right place. And even it speaks to content even, you get into the content. What content do these personas, do these audiences need to make their decision? And it may differ by the audience. So it really defines so much of how you progress with your campaigns and with your marketing efforts.
Right. And so you talked a lot about some of these demographic related numbers, income, job title, and employee numbers, things like that. But what about psychographics and clickographics too, for
Yeah.
that matter?
Absolutely. They all play into it. I mean, and depending on who you're targeting, again, like psychographics in particular, I think really work well with B2C, and nonprofits as well. And so understanding that is really helpful because, as an example, psychographics, when you think about if you're a nonprofit, we're at the end of the year when you're doing nonprofits typically have a really boom week, that last week of the year. And why is that? Because a lot of people are trying to reduce their taxable income at the end of the year. They realize, gosh, I've got all this taxable income I'm going to be taxed on. So it's a great time for nonprofits to capitalize on that and to try and get donations in. So that last week of the calendar year is always a really important week for nonprofits. And when you think about psychographics, it's not just, hey, I'm trying to target the people who have the biggest incomes to say to them, you should donate this week to our nonprofit to reduce your taxable income, but also looking at things like psychographics. What kinds of activities are they involved in? Do they tend towards volunteerism? Are they a member of a religious community? Maybe, those types of things that might indicate, yeah, this person is probably more likely to give than someone who is not. And so those two are really, really helpful in certain scenarios, especially in the B2C or nonprofit world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, one analysis that I remember from many years ago was around analyzing clickographics and how through personalization they were able to find correlations of people buying different products together. That like Italian wine and
Yes.
pasta was an obvious correlation, and yet
Right.
white wine and bread was also highly correlated, and that was a surprise to them that they weren't expecting to see, but the data showed that to be true. So I'm curious, what are some examples from your work and your clients that were maybe perhaps surprising or counterintuitive correlations like that?
I will say that, one of the ones that I was really interested in because I'm a Star Wars geek, I really love Star Wars, was one day I went into Facebook and I was using one of the tools in Facebook to really understand the marriage of these psychographics and demographics. And I said, okay, what do people with Star Wars who like Star Wars, what do they self-identify also liking? Like, what are some good correlations? And probably not a shock because who doesn't like pizza? But it said that, Star Wars people tended to have a real love of pizza. And I thought, these are opportunities. Think about, like, let's say a new Star Wars movie is coming out and Pizza Hut or Domino's or any of these big brands, what a great opportunity for them if they know that these marriages exist in the psychographics to have great, cool offers because they know, Star Wars people love pizza. So let's figure out a way to marry those two things together and create great offers, which can make us help us really have very successful marketing campaigns. And so there's a million of them out there, and it's fascinating to your point. Like, there's some things that you would have never guessed that they can be really surprising. I'm not surprised necessarily that Star Wars fans love pizza. Who doesn't love pizza? But at the same time, there are some that might surprise you, and those marriages are unique, and it helps you have a very unique marketing campaign when you can find those interesting niches where there's that psychographic overlap.
Right. Now, there are some different tools that will help you to see uh, these overlaps or correlations. They'll allow you to see different behaviors in different segments and how they differ. I'm curious, what would be some of your favorite tools that are not the obvious ones like Google Analytics or something like that, but
Right.
just something that maybe does personalization really well, or something that does analysis of data warehouses and user behavior really
Mm.
well, and so forth.
One thing I have really wished LinkedIn would do, LinkedIn for especially for B2B has some really great information of these overlaps in demographics and limited psychographics because it's really more on the professional level, but and not so much personal level. But there are some that are there that the groups and things that people join on LinkedIn. One of the things I really wish LinkedIn did more of is having a persona builder. I've tried to say to them, this would be a great thing. Marketers would buy this all day long because we'd be able to do exactly what you're saying is like sort of mix and match, like say, okay, let me upload as an example my ideal persona. Here's Janet. She is a CEO of a small business, and this is her size, this is her experience level, etc. Show me the lookalike audience, right? Show it to me. What does that lookalike audience really look like? I mean, what other things do they like? What other groups are they part of, and so forth. And unfortunately, you can't do much of that with LinkedIn right now. You could choose a lookalike audience from an advertising platform perspective, but there's no real like persona builder, which I think could be a very powerful tool from them. Facebook, on the other hand, does have some tools like that, and it's really fascinating. Like I said, like the Star Wars and the pizza example, where you could go and do some digging. And I think that's a smart move on Facebook's part because it does encourage you then to go after those audiences on Facebook, and they have all this great data. But I can't say from a personalization perspective that I know too many tools that do that. But it doesn't mean you as a marketer can't do that. What we do is we just build out a separate campaign for each of these groups, right? So we say, like, to take the Star Wars, the pizza example, let's say another thing that Star Wars people like is, I don't know, they're into higher education. Maybe they're into getting a graduate degree or something like that. Again, those kind of random pairings, we can create campaigns as marketers that are separate and say this campaign is targeting Star Wars people who love pizza. This other one is targeting Star Wars people who are looking for higher ed. Then you can really separate and track yourself and do your own personalization, even though those tools don't always exist to make it as smooth as you would like to do it, for you and kind of plan it out for you. There is a way for you to build it that way so that you can track it and you can see what was most successful, and you can segment that audience so that one is getting a very personalized message to them, and the other is getting a very personalized message to its own group.
Do you have any good examples of companies that have built out personas in such a full immersion sort of way that it is just really impressive? And a quick example, I've shared this a few times on the show, but I don't remember if it was Nike or Adidas, but they had these kind of full immersion environments with lockers, school lockers. You'd open the locker and it would be decorated, and it would have sports gear in there and textbooks and person's lunch and all that sort of stuff. And you would get a sense for that person, that persona.
Yeah,
And there was
yeah.
a whole bunch
Hmm.
of these lockers, and then there were full size, life size posters of each of these personas. So that gave you a full immersion experience of
Oh
the
yeah.
personas. Do you have any examples of really standout companies doing full immersion, or a really built out visualization of their ideal client avatars or personas?
I don't. And surprisingly, I think personas is often one of the more overlooked parts of marketing. And I think it's just not as thorough as I would like it to be. Some companies do a very good job of being very detailed, but I think that too many companies don't look at the data, and they're not always building this out based on their actual data. I think that I don't know if you know Adele Ravella. Do you know Adele Ravella?
I don't.
So she wrote a book called Buyer Personas. I think it's called Buyer Personas. And I met her quite a few years back. And her method for building a persona is the best I've ever seen. And it involves looking at that actual sales data, but also interviewing customers and getting more data from them that way. But I would say that most of these companies, have never really approached building that buyer persona adequately. It's been best guesses. I think marketers think they know what their customers are like, but if they aren't really looking at the data, they don't. And so, unfortunately, I think sometimes it's just sort of a ad hoc thing that not enough companies, not enough marketing departments are doing these personas to begin with. But I would love to see, like what you're saying, that the personas, there's a full immersion at minimum for the marketing department, but also for the sales team, quite frankly, to really understand this is who our customer is. And really, to your point, really fully immersing those departments and the company in who that target audience is, so they can keep focused on the prize, because I think that that's a real challenge right now. And I haven't seen too many companies that do it well, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. What about doing kind of user surveys or more just impromptu? What do you call it when you get a small test group of people together? I forget the name of that.
Oh, like a focus group.
Focus group. Yeah,
Focus
thank
group.
you.
Yeah.
So, do you have any examples of how to do this well? Either collect user surveys or do focus groups in a way that gets you actionable insights and not just interesting information.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's tough with customers because you don't want to bug them too much. You don't want to take up too much of their time to gather this information. I actually, before I started my agency, I was doing digital marketing for an online survey company that competed with SurveyMonkey.
Okay.
And so I come from the survey world. I know a lot about it. What I will tell you is the hard part is response rate in surveys is typically really low. And so the hard part is, if let's say you send out a survey to customers and ask them to fill it out, and you don't offer them anything to do so, like just like, hey, help us understand better and make our customer experience better, the response rate is going to be very, very low. It might be 1% to 3% at best. And so the problem with that is going to be, if you're basing all your persona information on 3% of your customers, is that a representative sample? I would say no. So this is where I like what Adele's approach is, which is Adele Ravella's approach in her book is actually interview. Pick some of your best customers, set up an interview with them, and you can certainly incentivize them. You can give them something as a thank you. You can do other things to help them, to encourage them to help you, but those are probably more meaningful than the random survey response. And also think about who you're actually interviewing. So like if someone sends me something like, I'm a CEO of a company, I'm doing podcasts, I'm speaking, I'm real busy all the time. So am I going to take the time to fill out your survey?
Yeah.
I'm not, and I'm just going to delete it, out of my email. So the question becomes, if somebody wanted to interview me and say, I really want to understand better, if they reached out to me personally, I might be more likely to respond to that than just a random email. So definitely think through, who is that audience? Because certainly a more junior level person in my organization might have more time and might be more eager to give their feedback. But for someone who's a senior level person, they may not have the bandwidth to just, if they've got a million things on their plate. So think about how you're going to deliver the questions, whether that's delivering them through a survey, that you email to people or print to, for people, or if you're going to call them. I'm much more likely to have a response if someone calls me than just sends me something random in the mail or sends me an email. That can get caught up in my spam too. So think about that process as you try and gather this data.
Yeah, something that occurs to me that could be very effective would be to contact those busy CEOs, and instead of just asking them the questions in the form of a voicemail recording or something, instead set up a podcast interview, and you're presumably going to collect a lot more data points from a lot more people than just would be feasible to have a separate episode for every single person that you speak to, but you could aggregate those little snippets of the best sound bites from those different interviewees that are your survey subjects and turn that into an episode about an interesting, I don't know, sort of trend or something like that.
Absolutely. There's a lot of different ways you can use that. And another couple of ideas that come to my mind is if you're a software company, you typically set up user groups. User groups are basically little focus groups for you. And it's a great opportunity to get in front of actual customers and talk to them about the product. And it's an opportunity even to float in a soft way, like a soft launch, floating out ideas for how to improve the product and how to make things better. What other products associated with our product would you like to have that we don't have? There's a lot of opportunity in a user group to, with a very dedicated audience who is loyal in many cases to your software because they're using it and they're gathering in a way to share ideas on how to use the software. So user groups are really great. Also, in the past, I've done things like customer summits where I worked for software companies in the past where we would bring our customers together and have a software summit, and we would bring the CEOs or whoever the users were or the buyers together to have, as you said, like small focus groups discussions about things. And the kind of information you could glean from those is so rich and valuable. And you may even, depending on what kind of company you are, you may even pay for them to come. The one thing that's great about things like a summit that you hold for customers, you can have them speak. And it's they feel honored to be asked, right? Like they feel honored to be asked to speak about their usage of the product, and they're often eager to do it. And if you can either offset or pay for their travel, that's always a good thing too. So there's lots of, I think, different creative ideas you can use to gather your current customer base together, get great information from them. It doesn't have to just be, I made a Google survey and I sent it out. It can be something much more intimate and helpful. And it also, the other thing that a survey doesn't always allow you to do is have that follow-up question. When you've got someone, like you said, podcasting with them, you're having a conversation, it gives you the opportunity to throw in an additional question, to dig a little deeper, which a survey does not always do because you can't always predict what those open-ended answers will give you. Mm-hmm. So, and that's the other challenge with surveys is open-ended answers, right? It's tough to review those and glean commonality between different respondents. And so it's not as simple as putting it in a spreadsheet, meaning like 5 people answered it this way. An open-ended answer gives you a lot more information, though, than a simple multi-choice type of survey question.
Right.
And so something to think about as you put these things together. What do you want to know from these people? Who are they? What's the best way to deliver this type of request to them? Those are all really important things to think about as you try and build out those personas and you want to get that information from your customers.
Yeah. When you were talking about customer summits, I was thinking, well, these could be virtual as well, especially with the pandemic. So you could easily invite a bunch of your customers to participate in some different best practice panels, and then you've got concurrent sessions and all sorts of things, and it's all done very inexpensively because it's all done online via Zoom or what have you. That could be really effective.
Absolutely. And, over the years, like I said, I've worked for lots of different types of companies and before I started my agency. And, some of them would do golf outings or, whatever it is that you think is going to be appealing to that group. Definitely consider that. And certainly, and I will say, I've reached out to perfect strangers during this pandemic. On the side, I'm a Girl Scout leader. I'm an avid Girl Scout, and I love to reach out to people. And the pandemic has made it actually an opportunity because so many people are more willing to just have a conference call with you over Zoom or whatever to share their knowledge. I'm always impressed when you ask someone for their knowledge, how receptive most people are to that. And even perfect strangers who I've never met, I would just reach out to them through LinkedIn and say, hey, would you come and maybe talk about, like I had somebody who was a developer for Animal Crossing, the game. And we were working on a video game design badge. And I wanted these girls to hear about, like, what's the process? And I know nothing about that. I haven't ever done that. But being able to talk to an actual person who does this for a living and say, this could be a career path. And ironically, my daughter, who is 16, my oldest daughter, she was really into that. And she's like, that's the career path she wants now. So it's amazing if you ask people and you ask them to share their expertise and knowledge, even if you've never met them and you're doing it virtually. I think people have been very open to that during the pandemic, and especially, and because to your point, they don't have to travel necessarily. It's very safe. And people are almost generally, I've always found, very eager to share when you just ask. And it's amazing the response you'll get.
Yeah. That reminds me of hearing about homeschoolers who will do a little field trip with a group of other homeschooling kids to the fire station and get to interview some of the fire men and firewomen and ask them questions about their job and so forth. And you can do this not just with homeschool kids or Girl Scouts or junior achievement, but you can do that in your vertical and do it for adults, not just for kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, something that's related to the concept of surveys is something called Net Promoter Score, NPS. I'm curious to hear what your take is on NPS. Is it good? Is it bad? Are you indifferent to it? What's your take?
I'm sort of indifferent to it. It's been around for a long time, and even back when I was in the survey world, we've been talking about the Net Promoter Score. I think it's one measurement. That's what I think. I don't think it's everything. Some companies really invest in it and think it is the holy grail of measurement for their success. But I don't agree with that necessarily. And in part because, again, every company is different, even in the same vertical, even with competitors, every company is a little different. And so I think it's certainly one measurement, and it's something I would pay attention to. And I think it's really interesting to know, but it's not going to tell you everything you need to know. It might alert you. It might be a red flag. There's something that you need to address and dig a little deeper. But I don't think it's going to be everything you need. So like with many things in marketing or in company measurement and the measurement of our goals for the company, that's just one measurement you can use. But I would always consider using additional measurements as well.
Yeah. I remember an episode from years ago, I think it was 2016. Jared Spool, the usability expert, was on the show here, and we spoke about NPS, and he just railed about it. He thought it was terrible, just a terrible system and set of metrics. And I'll link in the show notes to that episode, but that's pretty funny. Yeah, so I would love to hear also what your take is on these usability analysis tools that will tell you how people are interacting with your site and rage clicking and scrolling and not scrolling and trying to figure out things that are not so intuitive that you didn't realize weren't intuitive.
Yeah.
Like, for example, Microsoft Clarity.
Yeah. So I will say, like, you brought up scroll depth as an example. I found myself setting up scroll depth in Google Analytics, which is a measurement you can have in Google Analytics, quite a bit recently for some customers, because we're trying to dig into understanding why conversion isn't happening on a particular page. As an example, I have a client that I work with that sells alcohol and liquor and wine, fine wines and so forth throughout the United States. And one of the things we found on their pages was the landing pages that they would provide us with, where the product resides. I think that probably they were a little misguided in some ways, and that they wanted to probably use these same pages for organic search. And so they had loaded up the page, the top of the page, with a ton of verbiage, which of course Google likes from an organic perspective, but not so ideal when you're advertising and you're trying to get people to buy the product that's on the page. And so just the other day, yesterday, I was doing some analysis with this, and I had set up scroll depth because I had a feeling that people coming from digital ads were not ever seeing the product. They were not ever scrolling down that far. And so usability was definitely an issue. And absolutely what we found was the product didn't begin until about 50% down the page. And what we found was only 33% of all visitors, all site visitors, regardless of whether they came from ads or not, went past the 50% mark.
Wow.
So only a third of the visitors to that page ever saw the actual products. So they didn't really have an opportunity to become customers and buy product because they didn't see it. And when they start scrolling, they're like, it's all words. They don't see any whiskey. They don't see any wine, even though that's what they searched for. And they're only going to scroll for so long, and then that's going to become a problem. So there are lots of usability measurements, and many of them you could just do in Google Analytics, quite frankly. You don't necessarily need a special tool. You can even use the wonderful free tools in Google Analytics to understand better how people are interacting with your site. And scroll depth is just one. And I personally, I'm a geek about scroll depth. I really love it because, especially for content marketers, like I've got another client wanted to send, their whole goal for their campaign was just to send traffic to a blog post from LinkedIn. They wanted to target a specific audience and have them read these blog posts, a series they created. And that's great. But I was like, okay, well, we get them there, but do we know if they actually read it? Do we know that they actually absorbed this great story you're telling on this blog? And scroll depth is a great way for us to see, are they getting to the bottom of that content? And for content marketers in particular, what a great measurement to really understand, is the content I'm writing resonating with my audience? Are they engaged and going to read throughout the whole thing? And so that's just one fantastic example of a tool you can use and a measurement you can use to really apply that to different areas of your digital marketing to really understand better from a usability perspective, but also, the quality of the content itself and how what you've written, are people really going to absorb it and connect with that content? And that's what every content marketer should want. They put a lot of effort into that content and creating it. It's not just about ranking high on Google. It's about having your customers read that awesome content you wrote. If they're not reading it, what's the point? What's the point, really? So there's some really great tools, and scroll depth is just one of them from a usability perspective that can help you take a look at those types of things that you're investing in from a marketing perspective and understanding how well they're working.
Yeah, and another example would be click heat maps, and that's something that's supported in Google Analytics as well. You don't need Crazy Egg or Hotjar in order to accomplish that.
It's true, and so I think a lot of people get a little bit lost on the whole where people click on the page. Like they'll want to measure things, like they'll put a banner ad, or they'll have a graphic that changes out on the homepage. They'll say, I want to see how many people click on this and go to someplace else in my site. The heat map is great for that, especially when you're doing things like redesigns too. You can take a look at what people have been doing on your site. Are they clicking on these things that you want them to click on? Because if they're not, why do you have them on the top of the page? If they're not doing their job at getting people further into the site. And again, it all comes back to what's the goal here. Like if people get to the homepage and there's a big banner there, what's the goal of that banner? Well, the goal of that banner is to drive them deeper into the site, to get them to specific content, or, take a specific action, like purchase this bottle of whiskey or whatever it is. And if they're not doing that action, then something's wrong there with either the placement of the banner, maybe what's in the banner. It requires more in-depth analysis, but you need to be thinking about, is this really working to get to the goal I want, which is ultimately purchase or drive them deeper in to become a lead, etc. So those are all really great ways from and usability is so key to everything we do in digital marketing, that it's really important to look at those types of metrics. But it's asking yourself too, what is the metric that I need to know to understand this better, and then setting that up so you can measure it.
Right. And so some of these metrics that would be the best metrics from Google Analytics and Google Search Console and whatever else to bubble up to the surface and show on a dashboard, let's say in Google Data Studio. What would be some of those metrics, and what would be an example or two of a really great Data Studio template that folks should check out and maybe utilize?
I haven't found one that I love, the Data Studio template that really applies to everybody. Again, it's custom to your goals, but I love Data Studio. I'm a geek about it. I could talk about it all day long. I think it's a great tool, and it's free, and it does a great job, and it integrates with so many different platforms. One of the things I will mention about Data Studio, though, and tools like Google Analytics, is that sometimes the data that you can pull in directly from a platform may not always be formatted with dimensions and metrics the way you want it to be. So a good example of that is in Google Analytics. For instance, there is a great graph that you see in Google Analytics. It's a pie chart, and it tells you where all of the traffic came from to your site. Did it come from organic search? Did it come from paid traffic, like email, whatever? All the different sources and mediums. The mediums. But the reality is that you can't actually pull that same data and display it in Data Studio the way that they do in Google Analytics in that pie chart, because it conflates dimensions and metrics. So sometimes you have to take that data out of the platform, reformat it the way you want, and then slap it into Data Studio. And so what I often do is I use Google Sheets. Google Sheets, wonderful. It's wonderful. I love it. And there's so many automated things you can do with it that you can take that data automatically from a tool like Google Analytics, put it into Google Sheets, reformat it the way you want, and then use the sheet inside of Data Studio and use that as your database, instead. And that works really, really well and allows you more flexibility sometimes to do the things you want to do. Another good example of that is, like, let's say I want to put together Facebook data, ad data. I want to aggregate Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter together, and all of the stuff that we've done with that. And I want to have an aggregate view. Well, a great way to do that is pull all that data into Google Sheets, do all your metrics, all your formulas you want to do, and then pull it right into Data Studio the way you want that data aggregated. And so it gives you a lot more flexibility. So I will just throw that tip out there that I love Google Sheets for that reason, because you can do a lot of things with your data, and even combining different platforms of data together, which is really helpful, into one tool that you pull that information into Data Studio.
Yeah.
But
now Google Sheets supports pivot tables too.
It does. I could talk about Excel and Google Sheets all day. I love spreadsheets. But yes,
for our listener who's not familiar with pivot tables, can you briefly describe the technology and the benefits of it?
I'll give you the Janet Driscoll Miller pivot table I just finished using a little while ago, which was my Christmas pivot table. I'm a real, like I said, spreadsheet geek. And I keep my spreadsheets every year. I keep spreadsheets for Christmas and what every gift is everybody's getting and what it costs, etc. And I have 2 daughters. And one of the things that I'm always concerned about is that I give them the equal number of presents. I want to make sure no one feels left out. No one says, I got one more present than her or whatever. And so I have all that stuff in there, and a pivot table allows me to take that data and very quickly, without doing a lot of analysis, just update a table that tells me here's the total number of gifts that are assigned to Emma versus Molly. And I can just do a glance at it. And when we were doing Santa, we also had Santa gifts and how many gifts is each kid getting from Santa? And, I mean, I had it. It's really geeky. If anybody wants to see my Christmas spreadsheet, happy to share it. It's really ridiculous, but the pivot table just organizes that information and aggregates it very quickly for you. So it's a very handy tool to have. Don't be afraid of pivot tables. They're fantastic. And you can use them to create charts. So from that data that you gather and aggregate in the pivot table, then you can create a chart from it too. And that's a really handy feature. So they have a lot of great ways to aggregate data together. As a marketing example, let's say I want to aggregate all my campaigns from different platforms. I could do that with a pivot table. I could say, show me everything that is for whiskey, right? My whiskey campaigns, instead of by Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, whatever it is, whatever platform. I could just say, show me all the whiskey campaigns and how they perform as an aggregate. And it's just so fast to be able to do that type of analysis when you use a pivot table. So definitely encourage everyone to use them.
Yeah, awesome. Do you have any examples of or templates or anything like that that you share for people who bought your book? They can download some Data Studio templates or some Google Sheets templates or anything like that?
I don't have any Data Studio templates yet, but it's definitely something I've been considering creating as a sort of an add-on for the book, because I do think that I think a lot of people need a place to start. But what I would say is, again, everybody's goals are custom. There are lots of good free templates in Data Studio now that you could use as a starting point, a jumping off point to create your own dashboard. But again, think about what those goals are that you and your company have. What are you being held accountable to in your company? What type of measurements? That's what you want to get into the Data Studio dashboard. And I also want to clarify that dashboarding versus reporting. Dashboarding needs to be reserved for things that you need to measure at the moment on a regular basis. Reporting, however, can be done at certain intervals. And so I think some people make the mistake of thinking dashboarding needs to show me every single thing. And that is really not the case. Dashboarding is most effective when you are reserving it for things that you want to keep an eye on, that you're concerned are changing at a regular interval pretty quickly, that you want to keep an eye on. And that's where dashboarding works best. Otherwise, think of it more as a report, a moment in time where you measure month over month and year over year, et cetera, and really more of a report. So dashboarding, try and reserve that for things that are constantly moving. Other things don't need to be viewed that way.
Yeah, that's a great point. And another thing, too, for our listener is to bear in mind that whether it's a report or a dashboard, if the data doesn't have integrity, maybe there are errors or incorrect data collection techniques in place, then it doesn't matter if it's a report or a dashboard. Either way, it's wrong because the data is wrong. Yeah, I found, for example, doing Google Analytics audits for clients that they were double counting users. They'd have the snippet of GA code twice in the HTML. They'd have it maybe in the Google Tag Manager, and then separately just in the HTML as a JavaScript. So you got to look for that sort of stuff. You got to do an actual audit of your Google Analytics, make sure all of the goals are set correctly and everything.
That's a very good point. I mean, and one of the things I do when I take on a new client, every new client we look at, we always immediately look at their analytics and try and repair things, because in the 17 years now that I've run an agency, not once, and it does not matter if it's a small company or a very large company, not one time ever have I had any company walk through our doors that's gotten it right out of the gate. There's always mistakes. So to your point, an analytics audit is a very helpful thing to do, even if you don't do it yourself and you outsource it to someone else, to ensure that you've got that data tracking accurate. Because I can't tell you how many discrepancies I see. A real common example, and I've got this example in the book that I have seen before, is as a best practice, as an example, at our agency, what we do is we create all of our Google Ads conversions inside of Google Analytics and import them. That is that's what you can do with Google Analytics. You can create goals in your analytics reporting view, and you can import those same goals into Google Ads. What I've seen happen is sometimes they're built separately, where the Google ad conversion is built inside Google Ads, and then separately in Google Analytics, someone's built a goal. And inevitably, they're not measuring the same thing. And so if you are a marketer and you're using, as an example, let's say in Google Ads, you're maximizing to conversion, fantastic. And it's maximizing to your Google Ads conversion, great. But many times that Google Ads conversion number isn't going to match what's in analytics because you're measuring it in a different way. You set it up differently.
Right.
And so as a best practice to keep everything seamless, it's really helpful to create those goals in analytics and just import them into Google Ads. And that way you know it's consistent. Otherwise, mistakes are made. That's a real common one we see, is where they've been set up separately and the tracking is not the same. Same thing happens with when you look at, let's say lead generation. When you look at the leads you generated through HubSpot, the actual signups, the form fills, and then you look at the goal in Google Analytics. If they don't match, why not? Why is there a problem? And so I've seen that happen quite a bit, where sometimes the event tracking isn't correct and things like that. So definitely audit your analytics. That's great advice, because ultimately you don't want to be making decisions from bad data. It's not going to help you. It's just going to potentially have you throwing good money after bad.
Yeah. Awesome. This was all fabulous advice and very actionable. Now, for our next action for our listener or viewer, I would say they should get your book, Data First Marketing. Where do they find it? And I believe you have a separate book website as well. And you also have a free book giveaway offer. So if you could share all that with our listener, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So you can pick up Data First Marketing at Amazon. It's available on Amazon right now. And I believe it's available in almost every country too. I was checking with them and it seems to be available pretty globally. So you can order it there. Also, as Stephan mentioned, we do have a book website. It's data-firstmarketing.com, where you can learn more about the book. And on that site, there is a mini assessment. So if you're not sure where you stand today with your organization and your marketing organization, and understanding how close you are to achieving real data first marketing, we have a full assessment in the book. But you can take a mini assessment for free on the site and sort of get an idea of where you are on our data first marketing maturity model, like how evolved and how mature your organization is. I will say, don't get discouraged. I don't expect anyone to be expert at this at this point. There's going to be pitfalls. There's going to be areas for growth. And so you just take it one step at a time, and the book helps you to plan that out. And if you'd like a copy of the book, we are doing a book giveaway. And so you can go to bit.ly/marketing speak, all one word, marketing speak, just like the podcast. And you can fill out the form there, and we'll do a drawing to give away one free book to one of the listeners. So would love to have you enter that as well. But certainly check out the website, try that assessment, learn more about the book and what Data First Marketing is about, and hopefully it'll be a real help for you.
Awesome. And then to follow you on social and hire your agency, where would they go for those two things?
So you can follow me on social. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and I'm just Janet Driscoll Miller on LinkedIn. You can follow me there. But also on Twitter, I'm Janet D. Miller. I'm not as good at tweeting. I'm real terrible at tweeting. I do a better job around conference events and things like that, but I'm really terrible about tweeting like I should. But that's where you can follow me. You can also reach me via email at jmiller@marketing-mojo.com, or you can check out my website at marketing-mojo.com and learn more about our data first marketing approach at our agency and how we can help you. if you need an audit, like we talked about an analytics audit, we do things like that to help companies understand where they are with data first marketing and to help make sure that they're measuring everything appropriately. But we can help you with digital advertising, SEO, analytics. If we could be of help, let us know.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Janet, and thank you, listener. Now get out there and make it a great week and create lots of value for your clientele, and we'll catch you on the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.